and welcome to a new episode of All Things Fitness, Nutrition and Research with Astrid, your APD, your dietitian with T, no C. In this episode, we are talking with the guy who is the most passionate about glute research, glute training, overall training optimization, as well as development of a functional body for life. And we are talking with Bret Contreras. We are going to be covering a few general questions on glute anatomy, glute training, and then we're going to move on to the fun part. We're going to cover underrated, true or false, yes or no, this or that. I think you're going to enjoy this episode a lot. I hope you enjoy it. Please make sure you like, subscribe, comment any questions below as we go through the questions. Click the bell button so you don't miss any of the new episodes. I see you on the other side. Bret, thank you so much for coming to this podcast to have a chat with me, all things glutes. I want to know a little bit more of your background. I know you've mentioned in your books and like all the time I hear you talking about glutes that your passion pretty much came about because not because the glutes are very important, but because you didn't have much of it. So tell me a little bit about your story. What brought you to where you are now?
Yeah, the person that has amazing glutes does not become the world's glute expert. You know, the world's glute expert is going to be someone with glutes don't come naturally to them. They don't have the best genetics to have glutes. In my case, my whole family has nothing. You know, I have an identical twin brother and he just has no butt muscles. And so, yeah, I was very insecure of that. And a couple times, I have a couple memories where I had a few girls whom I had a crush on in high school. I heard them say they want to go watch the football team practice because they love checking out their glutes in their football uniforms. And I remember just thinking, oh my God, if that's important, I'm screwed. I know girls ever going to like me. I have no butt muscles. And then I remember my sister's boyfriend commenting on, we were playing golf and I was on the, like the ninth hole and he's like, I'm ready to tee off. And he's like looking at my body and he's like, Bret, it's like you're missing the muscles that, are the butt muscles. It's like you don't have any. Your back goes right into your legs. And I just remember being like, I am not okay with this. I need to figure out a solution to this. But back then, all the exercise I'd try, I was a tall, lanky kid. I didn't know how to squat properly. Squats, I folded like an accordion. I felt them all in my quads and low back. Deadlifts, I would round over. We didn't have the internet back then. We didn't have, camera phones to help make sure our form was good. So I was rounding over and I didn't know it. I was, using all my, probably my hamstrings and a lot of low back to carry out my deadlifts. And I don't want to say the low back doesn't perform the deadlift. You just round too much and you feel it in your low back. But regardless, I would always go to the store. I'd go to the library of the store every couple of weeks and I would devour all the information I could. And I wanted to learn as much as possible about glutes. But back then, no one talked about glutes. The bodybuilders don't mention glutes. So I would mimic their leg days. I would look at my favorite bodybuilders who had the best legs and I'd do their leg workout hoping to get their glutes. But over time, the internet came out and I, got more and more exposed to more and more information. Eventually, I learned how to research. And that's how I became the glute expert because my genetics are not that good for glutes. Even now, I've been training glutes for, 30 years now, training them properly for more like 20, 25 years. I still don't have the biggest glutes, but I'm just so happy that they're not straight up and down like they used to be. I'm so happy that now, when I'm, naked or wearing a pair of boxers in front of a girlfriend, they might comment that I've got a nice butt. That was a dream come true when that started happening because before I was so embarrassed. I didn't want anyone looking at me there. I was horrified. And you can't relate unless you've had that problem. If you've always had glutes, you don't know how insecure you are of having no butt muscles. You get made fun of for it. It's definitely something you want to fix if possible.
That's awesome. I think one of the most beautiful things about your career is that you're so dedicated, and it's an area that we
I think nowadays, I think we understand and we agree that glutes are a little bit more than just for physique. They are much more important than that. And the beauty of your research and everything you've done is that you have sort of uncovered all of that extra information about how glutes are important for posture, for performance, for like longevity, for lots of different things. So I guess this is so valuable, and the area that you have just got so deep into and specialize in. And I wanted to pretty much get into the basics before we move to more specific questions. The idea of these interviews to make it also quite interactive, a little bit more different to what you normally get into other interviews. But there's a couple of things that we sort of need to sort of set the basics on. And one of those is obviously when you refer to the training the glutes, what muscles specifically are we talking about?
Well, it's mainly the gluteus maximus and I suppose the gluteus medius, and there is a third muscle, the gluteus minimus, but that's underneath the glute medius. So, like, I always laugh when people act like they know what the glute minimus does. It's like, well, we don't have a lot of studies showing exactly what happens, but there's 3 subdivisions, or at least 2, with the gluteus minimus. There's 3 subdivisions with the gluteus medius. There's 2 to 3, well, 2 subdivisions of the gluteus maximus. So they're functional subdivisions, meaning they function uniquely from one another. If you study like EMG and how the neuromuscular system works during movement, you can see, for example, the glute max, which, by the way, the glute max is twice as big as the glute medius and minimus combined. So it's the biggest of the glutes. But the glute max kind of makes up the bulk of your glutes, and there's an upper and lower subdivision. The upper and lower are both responsible for hip extension and hip external rotation, but only the upper subdivision carries out frontal plane hip abduction, meaning moving out your leg out to the side. The glute medius is also highly involved in frontal plane hip abduction, like moving your leg out to the side. The posterior fibers might help with hip extension, and it's like with the glute medius and minimus and even the glute max, it depends what level of hip flexion you're in and abduction and internal external rotation, because the hip's a ball and socket joint. They move all around. So for example, the glute medius at the bottom of a squat, there's some research showing that it's a hip internal rotator. So it's not going to help you keep your knees out at the bottom of the squat, because when you're at the bottom of the squat, you're in deep hip flexion. So there's a lot of complexity with the glutes, but if you just do a wide variety of exercise, then you cover all your bases.
Out of the 3 main muscle groups that you just described, which one do you consider is the most important and the most undertrained?
Well, interestingly, I mean, obviously to me, it's the gluteus maximus. I think you can make a good case, all the muscles in the human body are important, obviously, but you could make a case that the gluteus maximus is the most important. It's kind of like one researcher called it the Swiss Army knife of muscles, because it's involved in so many things. And I just think, let's say I had a human diagram in front of me and you were looking at it, a muscular anatomy chart, right? You hone in on the glutes because they're the centerpiece, they kind of the keystone muscle, like they connect the upper and lower body together. They've got a lot of different attachment points. Interestingly, around 70 to 85% of their attachments are to fascia, not to bones. And that's very unique. I don't know if there's another muscle like that. I'm sure there might be some obscure muscle, but most of the larger skeletal muscles attach to bony attachment points, So 15% attached to the gluteal tuberosity. And then you've got all these different, and like the sacrum and things like that, actual bones. But then a lot of the fibers attach to the IT band, and then they kind of blend in the glute medius and the spinal erectors and stuff like that, the thoracolumbar fascia. So it's a very unique muscle. The gluteus maximus is, again, responsible for hip extension, hip abduction, and hip external rotation. These are very athletic endeavors, Like when you swing a bat, you're doing all 3 of those at once. You're extending the hip, abducting the hip, and external rotating the hip all at the same time. When you swing, strike, throw, sprinting is mainly hip extension. jumping, hip extension, cutting side to side, hip extension and abduction. Twisting is external rotation. So it's a very athletic muscle group. That being said, I wonder if in the research, the glute medius is more heavily researched than the gluteus maximus because of its role in stabilizing the hip. Like, for example, when you walk or when you stand. This is a problem with the elderly who have really weak hips. They need to strengthen their glute medius. So, and then the glute minimus just being the fact that it's the smallest muscle and it's kind of buried underneath the glute medius. We don't know as much about the glute minimus. So they're all important, but the glute max gets most of the glory. It steals the thunder because of its role in aesthetics and making your butt look good.
How do you distinguish when there is a hip dominant from glute dominant exercise? Is there a difference between these two terms?
Well, all right. Different exercises can be performed in different fashions. For example, if you do a squat and you do a high bar squat with Olympic shoes on, with heel elevated, and you stay as upright as possible, and you let the knees jut out and you go deep, then that would be a very quad dominant type of squat. Whereas if you do low bar and you keep the shins vertical and you sit back as far as possible and you lean forward, that would be a very hip dominant squat. But in general, the squat is knee dominant in general, but the variations exist on a continuum. Now, as far as hip dominant versus glute dominant exercises, I would say most people would refer to hip dominant exercises, things like deadlift variations, good morning variations, back extension variations, reverse hyper variations, and even hip thrust and glute bridge variations. I would further separate those into straight-legged. The straight-legged hip extension exercises work more hamstrings, whereas the bent leg hip extension exercises work more glutes. So, for example, when the knee is bent and you're doing bridges and hip thrusts, the hamstring is slackened. It's not stretched its optimal length, so it's not going to contribute quite as much to hip extension. And now the glutes have to kind of pick up the slack. They have to contribute even more. So, in my opinion, glute dominant exercise would be bent leg hip extension exercises, and then also abduction and external rotation exercises, because they rely a lot on the glutes. They don't use as much quad and hamstrings and muscles like that.
I wanted to know, when we think about training glutes for hypertrophy, how much and how often is too much or too little? Because I know it's on a spectrum as well, but what would be your stance on knowing or telling how much is too much or how much is too little?
Well, I mean, if I just had to throw out blanket recommendations, I'd say do 12 sets 3 times a week for a total of 36 sets per week. Okay. In general, can you develop glutes training 1 day a week? Yeah. The research is pretty clear though, that you'll see better results training them twice a week. So can you get by training the glutes twice a week and see good results? Yeah. Can you get good results training the glutes more than 3 times a week? Probably, especially if you know how to set up a program, differently. Then you could train the glutes 6 times a week. You could do more volume if you don't push each set quite as hard. But in general, 36 sets a week, in my opinion, is ideal. According to the research, 20 sets a week would probably be ideal. But there's no research on the glutes in that fashion. Most of the research is on other muscle groups. I think the glutes can handle more volume. Now, how do you know if you're doing too much? Well, you're probably not seeing results. You're not growing. I have clients who will come to me and I figure out that they're doing like 120 sets a week and they're not seeing very good results, Now, I know a lot of guys, one study showed that women tend to do a lot more volume for glutes than men. And that's pretty obvious, right? Like more women care about glute training than men, whereas men tend to care more about like training the delts and the arms and things than women. But I don't give men 36 sets a week always. Sometimes I just try to, because I don't want to scare them away. They might already be doing squats and deadlifts, and I'll just try and have them do lunges and hip thrusts with it, Then they might see good results, and then I might convince them to buy a glute loop and carry out some abduction movements at night or something, some kickbacks and abductions at night. And there's those loops work very well in hitting your upper glutes, and so you need to develop the upper and lower glutes. Hip thrusts and like back extensions and cable kickbacks do a good job of developing the upper and lower glutes together. But movements like squats and lunges tend to target the lower glutes a little better. And then abduction movements tend to target the upper glutes a little bit better. So the best glute exercises possible would be your hip thrust variations. And then you would also want to do squatting and lunging movements for extra lower glute work. And then frontal plane abduction, meaning standing out straight, moving your legs straight out to the side, or side lying where it's in line with your body. Those work the upper glutes, they target it. So that's kind of a general overview with glute training, but it's so nuanced. There's so many aspects to it. And with men, they might just be doing, like 8 sets for glutes twice a week. They might only be doing 16 sets, but it's a lot for them, especially if they know how to train really hard. I know I don't do that many sets for glutes. I can't recover from it.
We think about hypertrophy and we try to obviously understand that there needs to be progressive overload for getting to a much better place. How does it look for you in terms of looking at working the glute and developing the glute through progressive overload? How do you manage to put together something that may help move towards a better glute development?
Well, I always say there's 2 roads that maximize hypertrophy. Okay. There's the road of progressive overload. There's also the mind muscle connection road, the path of mind muscle connection. All right. People confuse, this is going to sound confusing, but I'll explain it. All right. People confuse ground reaction force from muscle force. Meaning, let's say I squat more weight. They automatically assume, well, that was harder for your glutes, so your glutes must be growing. But you could set a personal record. You could utilize progressive overload, but just use crappy form. Your form was sloppier, you didn't go as deep, or you did it in a manner that worked the quads a little more. That doesn't automatically mean just because you squatted more weight that you used your glutes more, or just because you hip thrusted more weight doesn't automatically mean you used your glutes more. You could have skimped on the range of motion and not fully locked out. You could have, say you were doing pauses and now you're not pausing at the top. You're using a different tempo. You're being sloppier. You're relying more on momentum. So technically progressive overload means you're doing more over time. So if you're utilizing true progressive overload, your glutes should be growing. The problem is people tend to cheat. They tend to lie to themselves. I'm training a high school kid right now. Oh my God, they cheat so bad. Everything's to try to move more weight. So they'll bounce the bar off their chest for bench press. They'll lift their butt off the bench. They'll squat doing only a quarter squat. They won't go down deep. Every way they can cheat, they will cheat. So it's only progressive overload if you use the same form, the same range of motion, the same, similar tempo. So if you're using progressive overload, that means you're using more weight. That's ground reaction force, though. It's like you're on numbers, whereas the mind muscle connection, that's focusing on muscle force, on muscle activation. If you focus on, you might not set a PR, but if you use really good form and really squeeze the glutes, then technically you could grow your glutes because you are using more muscle force over time, even though it's not measured quantitatively because you're not setting personal records, but that's more of a qualitative thing. The quality improves. So it's kind of like a yin and yang. You've got quantity and quality, and they balance each other out. And you need to do both if you really want to grow your glutes the best.
I completely agree. I think people underestimate and overlook the importance of actually trying to connect with their muscle, especially when we're thinking about a muscle group that is so important. And sometimes in many exercises, you don't really feel the glutes unless you're actually paying attention to the full range of motion, squeezing the glutes, trying to activate them. Now, there is one part that we're going to move towards now that is overrated and underrated. I think it is very fun, these parts, because it is always good to sort of hear your stance on something and explain why you are saying that answer. Are you ready?
Let's do it.
Okay. So the first one is the importance of glute training beyond aesthetics. Is glute training for health and performance is it overrated or underrated?
I think it's underrated. I think people do need to focus. You look at like how like the elderly train, and they typically use all machines and they don't use good range of motion, and they're not strengthening their glutes. They might do leg extensions, leg curls, leg press really in a really shallow manner, and they're not strengthening their glutes. They're not developing their function as much as possible. If they instead did, body weight exercise, learned how to squat deeper, and did like deep body weight box squats and variations of hip thrusts, like body weight hip thrusts, and knee banded hip thrusts, and then slightly adding some load like dumbbell hip thrusts, and maybe even progressing to single leg hip thrusts, that would be better for them functionally than just using a bunch of machines. But it's more complicated. You tend to need a trainer to do that, because these lifts aren't, you need to be taught how to do it properly. It's hard to learn on your own.
Should you be training glutes not just for aesthetics though? Just like if you want to train for like protecting your lower back, preventing injuries, for health, longevity?
Proper glute training to maximize muscular development also ensures you strengthen it from every angle, which maximizes function. So like I said, there's all these subdivisions. So you would want to do squat and lunge type movements. You'd want to do hinging movements like deadlifts and good mornings and back extensions. You would want to do thrust and bridge movements, hip thrust, bridges, frog pumps. And you want to do both bilateral and unilateral variations of those. You'd also want to do hip external rotation movements. You'd want to do abduction movements. And then the abduction movements you'd want to do in the frontal and horizontal planes, the transverse plane. So you're bent over. So really any which way you can train your glutes, you're going to do that for maximum hypertrophy or maximum muscular development. But then you end up maximally developing function at the same time, because you're strengthening your glutes from literally every angle possible.
Okay. Now, low activation exercises with bands and body weight targeting the glutes for hypertrophy. Do you think is that overrated or underrated?
Overrated. I think we started as an industry, we started doing low load glute activation exercises in the warm up. And the reason we did that is because, we realize those exercises, you tend to feel them working the glutes well. But the idea was to activate them so that then you could integrate them more into more complex movements like squats and deadlifts. And that's kind of the old way of thinking. It's like activate by doing these. Think about it. All the activation exercises were back then, I can tell you every one of them. It was glute bridges. It was single leg glute bridge. It was cable pull throughs. It was sideline hip abduction. It was the sideline clam. It was the fire hydrant. It was the bird dog, the quadruped hip extension, band work, like X band walks and like lateral band walks and sumo walks. What else was there? It was those were all exercises that were either horizontal hip extension exercises or lateral rotary glute exercises, because all the popular glute exercises were vertical hip extension exercises. And you do those glute activation drills, and then in the workout you would do squats or like a lunge, and then maybe like a trap bar deadlift or a Romanian deadlift or something like that. And instead of thinking it like that, the next best, the logical next step is to say, let's stop doing all these low load glute exercises. Let's just do hip thrusts or barbell glute bridges. Let's just do band work. Instead of doing body weight abduction exercises, let's actually throw on a band and make it harder, or let's do them from a cable column. So if you're doing cable standing hip abduction or ankle weight, and you're doing, hip thrusts and building your strength load, then there's no need to do the low load glute activation exercises, in my opinion. Some people would say to wake them up and get them activated with lighter loads, so then you'll use them more, but I don't think that's necessary.
Okay. The rule of thirds for training the glutes optimally. I know you came up with this, and that there is a video that you have about this. Do you think is this rule underrated or overrated?
I mean, obviously I'm biased here. I'm the developer of the rule of thirds, so I'm going to say it's underrated. That said, I don't think you need to do I don't think you need to be militant about it. You know what I mean? I don't think you have to be like worried, like every single set needs to have every single variation, or so you don't, every single workout doesn't have to have an exact number. Like, you don't have to have throughout the week, say you do your 36 sets. You don't have to have exactly exactly 12 sets of vertical, 12 sets of horizontal, and 12 sets of lateral rotary, I think it doesn't always have to be that strict. So a lot of people are probably wondering what the heck we're talking about. What is the rule of thirds? I would say that the rule of thirds, like, to try to sum it up quickly, the rule of thirds is something I came up with, and it's like it came to be because people kept asking me questions like, "Hey, Bret, how often should I train heavy? How many heavy sets should I be doing?" I'd say around a third of your sets should be heavy, around a third should be moderate, and a third should be light. How many sets should I train to failure? And I'm like, around a third should be to actual failure. A third should be, 1 or 2 reps shy of failure. And then a third, they're still working sets, but they're not quite as like lateral band walks. You never really go to failure. You stop when it burns, when it's uncomfortable, but you could probably always do 10 more if someone had a gun to your head, Then the third component to the rule of thirds is how often should I do squats, or how often should I do hip thrusts? And it's like around a third of your exercise should be vertical in nature, where you got a bar on your back or dumbbells in your hands and you're doing squats or deadlifts or lunges. And then around a third should be horizontal, where you're doing like hip thrusts or like back extension, where the hardest part is the lockout. Because in vertical, the hardest part is the stretch deep down. In horizontal, the hardest part is the lockout, the squeeze. And then the third should be lateral rotary, meaning abduction movements, moving the leg out to the side. So that's the rule of thirds. So I think it's underrated because I'll look at people's programs and I'm like, cool, you're not doing any abduction movements. You're not going to maximize the upper glute development. So I think it's my
Put it in airplane mode.
Still on the podcast. Yes, I'm still on the podcast. Gosh. So anyway, I think it's underrated. I think you should definitely incorporate that, but don't be militant about it. Don't be like obsessive compulsive about it, because even with in my programs that I write, sometimes we do more. If we're focusing on the squat, I'm going to do more vertical exercise. I'm going to prioritize that. If I'm focusing on the hip thrust, I might do more horizontal. Some client I'm trying to maximize her upper glutes, so I might do more lateral rotary. If someone hates going heavy, some people hate doing sets of like 3 or 2 or 1 reps. I might have them only doing sets of 8 and above, if they absolutely hate going heavy. Maybe older populations, I'm not going to have them do as many sets quite to failure, or if they just hate, some people just hate going to failure, I might do more volume to make up for the fact that they're not pushing their effort quite as hard. So there's always exceptions to these rules.
Okay. What do you think about outer regulation for training glutes? Do you think is that underrated or overrated?
I think it's underrated. I think auto regulation, or kind of like training instinctively or listening to your body, listening to your biofeedback. These are all very important things, and that people don't do enough of, because if you have a program, for me, I'm 45 years old. I've been lifting for 30 years. Started lifting when I was 15. I can write a program. I never stick to it. I never actually stick to the program. I will always have to modify it, always. I have to listen to my body, because for me, the main thing is staying injury free, So I will go to squat one day and I'm like, this doesn't feel good on my knee or my low back or my hip. Or I go to deadlift, I'm like, oh, this doesn't feel right. My low back is really stiff. So I call an audible and I say, you know what, I'm going to do this instead. The person who sees the best results is the person who continues to feel good week after week. And yes, some days your joints will be beat up. Some days your muscles will be very sore, but you're recovering each week. You're not feeling like crap week in, week out for the whole month. That's very important. So I think it's underrated.
Training with pain, or like being, not pain, but being very sore and continue to train because you were supposed to train 4 or 5 times a week, but you, in the first or the second session, you got sore. Do you think continue to train seems to be overrated or underrated?
I mean, that's overrated. It's so overrated. And that's the best thing that I offer my clients. my clients here in Las Vegas, my clients in San Diego, I'm always teaching that to them. And that's what's hard about being an online coach. You don't see them performing. When you see them, I can't tell you how often. I mean, my client last night, the high school kid I told you, I'm like, yeah, you're done with deadlifts. You're done. Wrap it up. Like, he's like, why? I'm like, I know what 495 looks like with him. It looked terrible. So, and he went to do, he went for a new PR. He went for 610. The bar didn't come off the ground. He's fatigued. He can get that. He'll get that next session. He's fatigued. So I needed to do less with him, because when you have a really crappy session, chances are you didn't lose a bunch of strength. You're just fatigued, and fatigue masks fitness. So if you lighten up the lighten up the day, don't do as much volume, don't train quite as hard, and then come back a few days later, you tend to do very well. That's something that takes you a long time to learn, though. This whole mindset, like no pain, no gain, and no rest, like those do more harm than good, in my opinion.
I agree. When we think about heavy glute training always equals heavy lifts, is that something that you think is overrated or underrated?
You can have body weight exercises that are hard, like pistol squats are very hard for me. The most I've ever done is I think I did 3 pistol squats at one point. Now I probably can't get one. That's not heavy in terms of external load, but in terms of torque, it's hard because it's a lot of load on the hip joint. So then muscle force creates torque, which moves the body, which creates ground reaction force. So you have to think it's different for every exercise. If you're at the top of a back extension, you can have body weight, especially if you have your hands over your head in the prisoner position. You're at the top of a back extension. There's no load, but you've got the superincumbent body weight above the hip joint, which is your whole torso. And you take the system center of mass of that superincumbent portion, which is probably close to here, and you take the load, how much your upper body weighs. Well, my upper body, I weigh 250 pounds. So my upper body probably weighs 65% of that, So yeah, I have a lot of weight, and then you take the system center mass distance from that to the hip joint, and that's your moment arm, that's your lever arm, and you multiply the two together, that's going to require a lot of torque. So it's not just about the external load. It's not about the weight. It's about the muscle force requirements and the torque involved. You can use bands and generate a lot of torque, and that requires a lot of muscle force, even though the bands they're not measured in external weight. They're measured by the degree that they stretch,
So that would you say, is that underrated or overrated?
So I would say that it's overrated. People care too much about heavy loads and PRs and always going heavier, and they should be thinking about the muscle, not just the loading.
Okay. Using bands and glute loops.
Using bands for glutes is underrated, in my opinion, especially lately. Lately, you're hearing all the time that bands, I've been hearing that they're overrated, that they don't work the glutes. That's foolish. I use my bands all the time. I use them, and I'm a big man, I'm a big brute of a man, and I use my glute loops all the time. I'll show you right here. I have them right there. See that? And I will put them on at nighttime. And, I love using my glute loops. I'll put them around my legs, and don't get me wrong, I love my squats and deadlifts, but, I do these a lot where I come straight out, and this works the heck out of you. You feel it working your upper glutes so hard. Sometimes I do just lateral walks like this. Sometimes I'll put my back up on a couch and do hip thrusts with my back up on the couch where I drive my knees out. You can also just do straight up kickbacks like this, and I'm feeling my glutes squeeze every single repetition. They're amazing. They're such a good invention. I don't know who the heck, why you have all these haters that bash, they clearly don't use the bands. They don't know what they're talking about, because the people who actually train their glutes love them. All the women love them. And then you got these stupid men, these powerlifters who are so obsessed with squats and deadlifts, telling people, quit doing all that, just squat and deadlift. And it's like, the girls who use the bands tend to, a lot of times you go to a local powerlifting meet, you're looking at these people in their singlets and they have no glutes. And you're like, if squats and deadlifts were that good for glute development, every powerlifter would have amazing glute development. Go to a local show. You will not see nice glutes on everyone. In fact, I'd say the majority should be doing more bands. And then you'll look at a lot of these women who use the bands religiously, or even Brazil, they use ankle weights like crazy. Ankle weights are similar movements than band movements. They do a lot of floor work, a lot of kickbacks and, quadruped movements, sideline movements. They tend to get nice glute development from that. Genetics aside, I think they're very underrated. Everyone should be using bands. And I know I sell the bands, so I'm biased in that regard, but I was a huge fan of bands long before I sold them. I was promoting the hip circles, and before hip circles were around, I was promoting the rubber bands all the time.
When you think about doing hip thrusts, banded glute hip thrusts, do you think is there a difference between putting your bands around on top of your knees or below your knees?
I like them above the knee. Some
Okay.
people like them below the knee. I say that's a matter of personal preference. I would say probably 4 out of 5 people like them right above the knee.
Because there seems to be a little bit of controversy. I've heard some people saying that if you use the loop bands above your knees, it tends to prevent your hip to lock out completely.
But if you have them below the knee, it doesn't?
I don't know. I've heard that, and I wanted to hear your thoughts.
Well, that's only in some people it does that, and with some bands. If you have, and to me that happens when you have if you have a band that lets you go a little bit wider and it's not so hard, you can definitely reach full hip extension.
Yeah.
But I do agree that people tend to not fully lock out when they use the bands. But all the stuff I'm hearing from all these naysayers, all the haters, all the people who say don't use bands because of this or that, people say they don't work the glutes. They do. They work the glutes. They work the glutes. The bands work the glutes very hard. You don't believe me? Put your hand on your glutes while you do them. People say, oh, it's the piriformis. It's not the piriformis. It's the glute max. It's the glute medius. These are amazing glute exercises. I've heard all these things, that raising your leg out to the side doesn't work the glute medius. Yes, it does. That's study after study. These people don't know what they're talking about. I've heard you shouldn't wear bands because you can't get full hip extension. Well, who cares? Who cares? You're training abduction at that point and hip extension. So you wear them every session. You can hip thrust 3 times a week. These people need to learn my system, because we hip thrust 3 times a week. Maybe one of those sessions you'll wear bands while you hip thrust. The other 2 you don't, but you're going to use the bands for kickbacks. You're going to use the bands for abduction. You can do diagonal abduction, which is kind of a mixture of the 2. You can do all sorts of, different abduction movements where we have the band hip hinge abduction, the lateral band walk, the band standing hip abduction, the seated hip abduction, and there's a million more. They're all great. It's all good to do. So this topic is more nuanced than people want to believe. It's just they want a quick answer, and it's like, no, they're great. They're great. But as far as the band placement, I don't think the having above or below the knees affects how you're going to lock it out.
Okay. What about finishers? Do you think are they over or underrated?
I think finishers are overrated. We don't have a lot of evidence that they work. I started doing those. I was the first one to come up with those many, many years ago. I just started realizing my clients freaking love it when I give them those, and they leave and they're like, oh my God. I'll get text messages from clients like, my glutes are still burning. I always think it's funny, if you found my phone, it'd be like ass on fire still, or like the next day, glutes wrecked. And they're happy. They want their glutes to be very sore. They want their glutes to burn. I always tell them these things are probably overrated. Progressive overload is the most important thing. You don't need very sore glutes all the time for that. But yeah, you also want to kind of balance out. You want the clients to like the session. You want them to enjoy the training. That's very, very important,
When we think about exercises that people use to target glute maximus, and it doesn't necessarily mean that they are actually targeting glute maximus, I'm going to sort of tell you quite a few exercises, and you tell me whether they are actually over or underrated in regards to targeting this particular muscle, so the glute maximus? So frog pumps.
Frog pumps, underrated. I've heard people bash frog pumps. They're amazing. They hit the upper and lower gluteus maximus very well. I've heard they work the piriformis. No, they don't. I've heard they're bad for your sacrum and hip joints. No, they're not. They're very safe. No one has ever hurt themselves under my watch. The problem is probably 1 in 3 people don't feel frog pumps that much because of their particular hip anatomy. So if you're one of those frog pump non-responders, don't do them. It's the same thing as like sumo stance. Not everyone likes sumo stance, but people who tolerate it well will work their glutes well.
Do you need to do, like, do you think for that particular exercise, you probably want to do lots of different, like a lot of reps? Like I've done it personally, and I feel like I just put a timer for 90 seconds at least to actually feel like I'm getting the right muscle connection with that.
I don't start feeling the glutes until I'm on, I'll do sets of like, I might do 3 sets. I'll do a set of 100, a set of 80, and a set of 60. With the first set of 100, I don't feel the glutes until I'm on rep 60. But then from 90 to 100, it's like burning so bad I can't even see straight. It's like the worst burn I've ever had. Now, we also do Smith machine frog pumps. Those are amazing. And we do dumbbell frog pumps. So, like if you have extra load, you don't have to do as many reps. But my record is, I think I've done 140 pound for like 70 reps. Yeah. So, and I think on the Smith machine, gosh, what are my records? Smith machine, I've done, 315 for 20. I've done like, you can do a lot of weight on those, but then you don't quite do as many reps. But frog pumps work well with just body weight as well. You just have to do really high reps.
Okay. Bandit hip abductions, over or underrated?
Well, I would say properly rated because you've got a big spectrum. You've got the bros who say don't do them at all, they don't work. You've got the kind of like fit chicks that don't really, the ones that kind of don't work out properly, that they put a band on for everything and they just do these wimpy little, they're not using progressive overload. They tend to overrate them. The bros tend to underrate them. So then the balance would be properly rated because they are good to do. Just they're used in conjunction with also, you're going to use barbells, dumbbells, body weight, and band exercise for the best results, not just bands.
Okay. But when we think about targeting the glute maximum, is that exercise particularly overrated or underrated?
I would say with kickbacks, they're good, but with, I would say with kickbacks, they target the glute max, but in general, I would say, they're better for hitting the glute medius or than the upper glute max. The lower glute max, they're not ideal for. So I would say overrated for the gluteus maximus.
Sumo deadlift for targeting glute maximus.
I think I would have always said overrated because you had all the bros who swore by doing deadlifts, squats and deadlifts. But lately I'm hearing that sumo doesn't work the glutes, and it does work the glutes. Sumo works the glutes very well. I'm hearing it's all adductor. No, it's not. So I would say now they've come back around and become underrated based on recent things I'm hearing. So I think that it's funny because you seem to be following similar people. I think you're saying this because you see similar things that I see. And these trends are just a bash. There are a lot of people like fitness experts who have found I'm just going to bash glute exercise, and they get a lot of attention that way. And I love all exercises. I can't imagine ever bashing movements. I don't understand it. They say that sumo deadlifts only work the adductors and they don't work the glutes. They're so wrong about that. The glutes are still extending the hips even when you're abducted. They work just as well. So I would say the thing is, if you just did like sumo squats and sumo deadlifts, that's a very incomplete. The sumo squat, you're gonna develop your quads and adductors a lot as well as the glutes. So you need to round out the program with a lot of glute focused work, or like, glute dominant exercise as well. So they were overrated. Now they're underrated. But I would say in general, probably properly rated for the glute max. They do hit the glute max well.
Curtsy lunges.
Curtsy lunges, again, you got the bros that say they're stupid. You have the stereotypical, like, think of this fit chick who just started lifting, who has all the headbands on and all the proper attire, but doesn't really know how to lift properly. She's going to do tons of curtsy lunges and band work, and her glutes aren't going to develop that much because she doesn't. You got to learn hip thrusts. You got to learn, more than that. But curtsy lunges are great. They hit the glutes well, but because of, they're probably properly rated because of the two different polar extremes.
Okay. One-legged RDLs.
That's I would say around 50% of people, like me, I only feel them in my hamstrings. I'm strong at them, but I don't feel in my glutes whatsoever. And then maybe 1 in 3 or 1 in 2 will say, oh, I feel those so much in my glutes. So I would say that just depends, but I would say, it's hard to not be biased based on how you feel. I would say overrated, especially if you do them non-brace. If you're like for me, I can do barbell. And if I'm like this, if I try barbell and I'm like this, I will, every rep is like, I'm all wobbly and unstable and like that. So I never feel my glutes that well. But if I brace onto something, if I hold on to something and then I'm like this, I get a way better glute workout because I'm not unstable. So I think a very important component is that you got to be stable. Some people have better balance than others, but I think I always do braced single leg RDLs.
Does it matter if you do IPSY or contralateral?
I think the research shows that contralateral is going to work a little more glute medius, meaning opposite hand as the leg you're working. But that's not that big of a difference. I'd say go by personal preference. I used to only like contralateral, but now I like ipsilateral as well. I like both.
Okay. What about bandit squats for targeting glute maximum?
Yeah, I would say overrated. Banded squats, bands are on your knees while you squat. You'll feel it in the glutes, but it's, I would say that it's best to do loaded squats, like barbell squats or goblet squats for the lower glutes, and then do frontal plane hip abduction, like cable standing hip abduction for the upper glutes, or band standing hip abduction for the upper glutes, than it is to do banded squats, but it's still okay to do from time to time. Okay.
Last one. Good mornings.
Good mornings is kind of like this single leg RDLs, and that, I feel them all in my hammies. But some people are like, God, I feel this in my glutes so much. And I'm like, really? But I would say overrated. That's more of a hamstring, it's more of an exercise that transfers to the deadlift. It helps your squat because it helps you not fear leaning forward, but it's not as big of a glute builder as some other movements are.
Okay. Now let's move to true and false, yes or no. Same, I'm going to sort of make a statement, and you will give me your answer and your rationale. So does the size of glutes equal more strength in this muscle group? True or false, yes or no?
True, it does. But the thing is, the size of the glutes is not very obvious when you look at someone. Case in point, I have this client, her name's Kiana. Her glutes are very round and shapely, okay? And everyone looks at her and goes, oh my God, I want my glutes to look like hers, all right? And then I have these clients, I have some Asian clients, like my client Savvy. Her glutes look very muscular from certain angles, but other times they can look very flat. And when you actually feel her glutes, she has a lot of glute muscle. And I thought it was sacral slope, but I've actually looked at Kiana versus Savvy's sacral slopes. I thought maybe Kiana's had a steeper slope, and so it made her glutes appear more round. But I now think it's more due to muscle belly, with like how the attachments come off the bone. It's just a weird phenomenon. If you palpate, if you feel their glutes, they probably have the same amount of glute mass. if you measured them in an MRI and calculated their actual muscle volume, they'd probably be similar amounts of muscle volume. It's just that Kiana was blessed with these bulge, these unbelievable roundedness. And, you know, a lot of Asian clients are not blessed with that. It's sucks, but there's studies on this with genetics, you know, and different skeletal parameters and then different muscular parameters as well. But yes, I think, you know, but there's also density of glutes. So I've got some clients that have such dense glutes. They're so strong. My client, Angela, she's from China. She can hip thrust 600 pounds. She's amazing. Her glutes are round and muscular, but she has the densest glutes. It's hilarious. I always make people, you know, when they're talking about this stuff, I'm like, Angela, and she's so proud to do it. She like flexes her glutes and people touch it and they're like, oh my God, that is crazy. They're so dense. So that probably has to do with the sarcomere density and other things, like maybe that has more lateral cross bridge connections or things like that, like costomeres and stuff. But you can have a denser glute or like just more that's like all muscle. Then some people's glutes might be fattier and just less dense. But in general, yes, a stronger glute is a bigger glute is a stronger glute. But there's more to the story with regards to how it's going to look. That has a lot to do with genetics.
Following that up, then, your genetics determine pretty much the development of your glutes, regardless of dedicated training. True or false?
True. I would say 60% of how your glutes look is determined by genetics, but there's three types of genetics. There's the genetics of how you look, Astrid. There's the genetics of how you look untrained, eating like a typical diet. You remember what you looked like before you ever lifted, before you ever took your diet seriously. That's your untrained genetics, okay? That's not perfectly correlated with your trained genetics. So you'll see a lot of influencers be like, see, I don't have good genetics. This is all hard work. No, that's not true. You could have a very good genetic response to training where you just blow up from training. You start lifting and you respond very well to it. There's a third type of genetics, which is how your body responds to performance enhancing drugs. Everyone thinks, oh, I can just take steroids like the bodybuilders and I'll look like the bodybuilders. Well, I was at this gym in Tempe, Arizona. It was a powerlifting gym, and I remember talking to the owner, and he was like telling me, like, I overheard some guys talking about how much testosterone they're taking and stuff, and I was like, that guy takes testosterone? And then God, sorry, Glute Squad texting me. They don't know how to text. One time they don't construct one text, it's 14 texts in a row. So anyway, few words, send. Oh God. That's my clan Amanda. My strongest squatter. But anyway, so I remember talking to this gym owner. I was just blown away. I was like, oh my God, that I was doing hip thrusts. So I was like down low and they couldn't see me. And I was like, that guy takes steroids? And he's like, yeah, he's on this much. And I go, that guy takes steroids too? He's like, yeah. And I go, he doesn't even look like he lifts weights. And he's like, I know. And he told me, he goes, not everyone responds that well. And I was like, whoa, that's crazy. Because I always thought that growing up, I'm like, man, if I just took a bunch of stuff like them, I'd look like them. No, you wouldn't. So there's three types of genetics. Most people are concerned with the second type. How will your glutes look when you work out properly and when you eat properly? And it sucks because I would tell you the clients who have the best glutes don't train harder or eat better than the clients without the best glutes. Like, they just have better genetics. It's just the way it is.
Okay.
And I wish it were differently, but I feel like more people need to tell you that.
Poor posture and weak glutes may cause low back pain. True or false?
That one I would say is overrated. I know you asked for false.
True, false, or yes or no?
I wouldn't say completely false. I just think it's overly done. Everyone's like this fear mongering. And I probably am guilty of that, like, because I'll talk about how glutes help your posture. They help pain. They help this. And it's like, there's a lot to pain. There's a lot more to pain than people make it out to be. It's not just up. You have low back pain. You need to strengthen your glutes. Interestingly, anecdotally, so many people tell me, oh my God, I used to have terrible back pain. I came across your work. Now I don't have back pain anymore. The answer that the answer as to how that came to be is probably threefold. Number one, they start using different mechanics. They might be squatting and deadlifting this way, and I teach them how to do it differently, and that helps with their back pain. Number two, they get stronger glutes. They start using their glutes more and using other things less. That might help their back pain. Number three is just doing things differently can help their back pain, aside from doing a whole different program. Number four is their confidence in me. You get trained by Bret Contreras, you do one of Bret Contreras programs, you've heard of me, I have a PhD, I helped develop glute training in the industry. You think I'm a big deal. You have confidence in me. That alone can help with your pain. And number five, you're going to the gym, you're doing something positive and productive. You're interacting with your trainer, with different lifting partners, different gym members. It boosts your spirits. That can help with pain. Number five, I just thought another reason, you're standing taller, you're strutting your stuff. When I start getting bigger, I stand taller, especially when I'm around people. So all these factors can influence your posture and your pain and things like that. It's complicated. There's the biomechanical model, they call it the PSB model, the posture, structure, biomechanics model. That's kind of the old way of thinking. This is just crazy. I didn't realize how annoying I am. I'm sorry. That's the old model, right? You have back pain. You need to improve your posture, your structure, your biomechanics. You need to get stronger glutes. You need to quit deadlifting with a rounded back. You need to quit this. You need to quit hyperextending when you do back extensions. And while sometimes that works, sometimes it doesn't work. It doesn't always work. It's not always the solution, because now it's the BSP model, the biopsychosocial model, is more accurate. There's more factors involving sociology and psychology, and like your thoughts, your beliefs, what you've been told. If you're depressed, how many friends you have, if you smoke, all these things influence chronic pain, at least. But the coaches, the strength coaches, only knew about the biomechanical model. They never learned enough about pain. They never studied it. We've learned a lot from the pain scientists who help us learn a lot. So I think it's overrated. Or sorry, you asked me true or false. I think it's false in general.
Okay. The last one in this category is, to get a good glute workout, it's better to do high rep training. True or false?
Well, I would say true in general. Like if I do a heavy, sometimes my sessions are like, seriously, 3 sets of singles with squats. I'll do 3 sets of one, and then I'll work up to 1 heavy single with deadlifts. Now, granted, that might be a 600 plus pound deadlift, but I just did like 6 reps for my glutes and called it a day. I'm not doing that much stimulation for glutes when I do that. That's more for my powerlifting and I love being strong, or for me, some people wouldn't consider me strong, some people would, but if instead I would have done a band workout, I'd have a lot more, signaling, a lot more mechanical tension signaling to those glutes, and they'd grow better from that. But the best approach is to use a variety, in my opinion. But if you're going with one or the other, yeah, I would go high reps. And even with hip thrusts, if you do 1 to 3 reps on the hip thrust, you don't always feel your glutes that much. You tend to feel it in your hamstrings, your quads, your low back, your adductors. But if you do a high rep workout for your glutes, you feel it more in the glutes. I still think variety is the way to go, and you should do a heavy, medium, and lighter loads. But if I had to go with one versus the other, I'd say lighter is better than heavier. So true.
Okay. Now let's move quickly to this or that. So you choose. I'm going to give you sort of 1 or 2, 3 options, and you choose which one would be the best option in the case of like glute development and glute hypertrophy. So with the one-legged B stance or 2-legged glute exercises, which one would you choose is the best?
I'd go with bilateral, 2-legged. Yeah.
Okay.
Elaborate. I like unilateral. I wouldn't choose B stance, even though I like that you thought of that. I know unilateral, you tend to get more sore. Yeah, true or false to you? Bret Contreras is the most annoying podcast member you've ever had. I'm sorry. I didn't realize how many clients. I moved to Vegas and I still have all my San Diego clients and texting me about their workouts every day. That's how they've stayed strong though. So I like that you said B stance. I like that you included that option. And that's kind of the bridge between double and single leg. You get a lot of the single leg benefits, but you're more stable like you are in bilateral. I just think double leg hip thrusts are the best, double leg hip thrust variations. It would be a fun study to do. That would be an awesome study to show 10 weeks, for example, with 3 different groups. One did just bilateral movements, one did just single leg, one did all B stance. The thing is there's less B stance options, like for example, kickbacks are all a one-legged movement, you know. I guess you could do reverse hypers to be the bilateral, but there wouldn't be a B stance variation. But even if you just did B stance squats, deadlifts, and hip thrusts versus B stance, you know, you could do B stance leg press. You could theoretically, I guess, do B stance back extension. I don't know. It's kind of funny to think about that, but I would say bilateral mainly because of hip thrusts. And deadlifts are better. Deadlifts are better bilateral than unilateral, in my opinion. But squatting motions, I would almost say single leg is better than double leg for squat variations. But overall, I'd go bilateral.
I just had a question that it came just right now. I thought about it and I really wanted to get your thoughts on about the position of when you know there exists different type of like leg press, like there is the horizontal, the incline, and the vertical leg press. Is there much of a difference depending on the angle you put the leg press into? Like,
well,
what are you
okay.
working?
So, all right. Is there much of a difference? The loading is different, like because when you do vertical, you're lifting all the load. When you lift at an incline, you would do you'd use trigonometry to figure out the load. It would be like the sine of 45 degrees times that load. And then horizontal, if you just had free weight, it would be nothing. It would just be the friction on the ground like a sled. But we're talking about the selectorized machine where you lay down horizontally. That I like the most out of the 3 because of your hip flexion starting out. When you start out in the vertical leg press, you're flexed, you know, you're like, you know, and you're folded in half and you're lifting straight up. You end the lift and you're still in an L. You're in a, you know what I mean? You're flexed at 90 degrees at the end of the movement. So for your glutes, what did your glutes move through this very tiny range of motion? They only moved through maybe like a 20-degree arc. And in the 45-degree leg press, same. You don't move through a big arc. But in the lying squat, the squat machine, the horizontal leg press or squat, you get in there, you can mimic a squat. And you can make, it's very hard at the bottom. It's hard through a much greater range of motion. I would take that for the glute development any day of the week over the other 2, because you start in full hip extension, you go really deep. There's a lot more hip range of motion, you know, in that variation.
Okay. Only train glutes or full body training to target the overall glute hypertrophy? So only train glutes or full body?
Well, there's some research that might hint to the fact that if you want to specialize in a muscle, if you really want a muscle to grow, then you can't do too much for every other muscle. You really need to do a specialization program. And that goes for anything. If I wanted my arms to grow, you can't just train everything. All right, say I do 20 sets a week for every muscle. And then I'm like, I want my arms to grow, so I'm going to go up to 30 sets a week for every single muscle. Then I just ramped up everything, and maybe I overtrain a little bit and I don't see any better results. Maybe I see worse results, you know, theoretically. Instead, if I said, look, I'm going to keep everything else less. I'm going to reduce my training for arms, for chest, back, shoulders, quads, hams. I'm only going to do 10 sets a week for all those. And I'm going to jack my glute training up to 40 or 50 sets a week. Then theoretically, or no sets for any other muscle group, I'm only training glutes. Theoretically, you could see better results because now your whole body is developing its resources to repairing and, you know, increasing protein synthesis for the glutes. You're not sharing it amongst any other muscles. But I don't think you have to be like, you know, I still think you can throw in. You always want to train the entire body. You just, you know, you look better when you do, you get leaner overall, but some people have different goals.
Yeah. If you had to pick 1 to 3 exercises for training your glutes most effectively, which one would you choose?
So this is a different question than say, what are your three favorite exercises for glute development? I would say like, probably 3 hip thrust variations. I'd be like barbell hip thrust, pause hip thrust, and bar plus band hip thrust or something like that, or I'd be like, okay, hip thrusts, cable kickbacks and back extensions, rounded back extension with the feet turned out. Those would probably be my maybe those are my 3 favorite. But if you say, what's your best 3 combination? Now it's a different question. My best 3 combination would probably be pause barbell hip thrust. I'd probably go with bar plus band hip thrust because then you add a little bit more to the lockout. Walking dumbbell lunge to hit the lower glutes really well. And I'd say the cable standing hip abduction to really hit the upper glutes hard. So that's my best 3 combination would be those 3.
Okay. The last one here is splits or full body workout?
For glutes.
Yeah. Which one would you choose?
I'd say full body any day of the week because I love split training, but you can't do a glute specialization program if you're doing split routines because, think about it. How are you going to split? You would have the typical bodybuilding split is, all right, you have your chest day, you have your back day, you have your delt day, you have your leg day, you have your arm day. Those are your 5 days, and you only train legs like on, say, Thursday, You're not going to maximize your glute development with that plan. So you could say, well, I'll pair up triceps with chest, I'll pair up biceps with back, and that takes away your arm day. Maybe now I can have a glute day in between. But the thing is, even then, you're still having so many upper body days. So you could say, well, I'll pair up front delts with chest day and tricep day, and then rear delts with rear and lateral delts with back day and bicep day. Well, now you're doing push-pull legs. That's not really a body part split. It's still split, but it's push-pull legs. Or you could say, well, I'll just do all my upper body. Well, now that's not a body part split. That's an upper-lower split. I like lower-upper. In fact, one of my favorite styles of programming I do for my personalized programming clients is lower-upper glute. So they might do lower body on Monday and Thursday, upper body on Tuesday and Friday, and then a glute day, like a lot of band work and body weight work on Saturday. The 2 days off would be Wednesday and Sunday. But I still think full body is the best way to go. 3 full body days a week, maybe a couple of additional glute, like a little easy band glute workouts thrown in between there. But yeah, I would say full body is best for glute development.
Okay. Wrapping up, because I'm conscious of your time. What is one of your inventions that you are the most proud of?
I would say it's the hip thruster. It's so amazing, and I'm just made it better, but I can't show you. I could walk right out to my garage and show it. I'm so proud of it, but yeah, we haven't manufactured it yet. But that's the ultimate to me. It's such a convenient way to hip thrust. I wish every gym had a hip thruster, and especially because it lets you do band, and then my favorite is bar plus band. We put the bar in place, but you have a glute loop here, and you connect it to the frame, and that adds tension to the lockout. So bar plus band hip thrusts are my favorite. We do all pause bar plus band hip thrusts. They're amazing. It's just such a good, and you need a standalone unit for hip thrust. You're not going to hip thrust if it's a pain in the butt to set up. And I go to most gyms and I'm like, I wouldn't hip thrust here. They didn't create the environment. Imagine if you didn't have a squat rack. Well, you wouldn't squat. It would be too difficult to carry out. So I would definitely say the hip thruster.
I've seen there is a lot of imitations of the hip thrust machines in lots of different gyms, but they don't seem to be that anatomical or very convenient. They feel weird, especially when you sort of drop like something to like it is like a pad that you can drop or lift so you can accommodate your body, but it feels like when you put it on your hip, it sort of moves. I don't know.
I agree. It's really hard to make a machine that suits everyone. So what the manufacturers tend to do is like they test it out with a few of their bro friends, and they're like, "Oh, this is great," and they never tested the 5 foot tall female who now has to put her feet on the platform and she's in like full knee extension, trying to do basically a straight-legged hip thrust, feeling it all in her hamstrings, or the pad just doesn't feel right, or a lot of the pads hurt their hip bones when you get strong. It's really hard to make a good machine. But here's the deal with the machines. I like the Nautilus glute drive. I don't like the booty builder that much. My clients love, and I used to like the booty builder though. I don't know what, I don't like it that much anymore. But my clients like the booty builder the most, I know Hammer Strength just made one. It looks amazing. I've never tried it. Matrix has one. Matrix is good, but it's made for taller people, and you don't have to load a lot of weight on it, but that's an advantage. But when you increase the lever arm of where the weights go, you sacrifice some control. So it's beneficial in one way, not so much in the other way. Techno Gym just made one. I know Arsenal Strength has one. Theirs used to be terrible, in my opinion, because the back pad rolled, but they just made it to arc pad like my Scorcher used to be, and it's better.
So in other words, yours is the best.
Well, and it's funny, I like the Smith machine the most, the angled Smith machine. I like the vertical Smith machine most for squatting and lunging, but I like the angled most for hip thrusting. And I went through a period where I didn't like barbell hip thrusting for a while. And now I'm just going back to barbell hip thrust. And I found that I was doing glute drive and Smith machine. That doesn't strengthen your lockout as much, because I'm going to do barbell and I'm locking out going, oh my God, that is so hard. So I think barbell is the hardest to lock out. Therefore it's the best, but it's so good to have variety. It's so nice to have, an ideal situation. You'd have, hip thruster, you'd have different boxes of different heights. You'd have an adjustable hip thruster. You'd have and like the glute builder has an angle. You can have it straight or angled. That's nice. Some people like the angled variation more. It's just nice because I have one female client that loves the Nautilus glute drive the most. And she was so mad when I brought it to Las Vegas. I have some that only hip thrust off the booty builder. I have some that, there's a unit for everyone out there. And I wish that hip thrust machines were as common as like lat pull down machines. They're just a staple in every gym, but it's getting better. But we need the women to speak up. You need women going, listen, we represent 50% of the membership here. You have 10 machines for pecs, 10 machines for delts. You have all these machines for quads and hamstrings, and you've got one glute machine. Something's not in balance here. You guys need to order more glute machines. You need to order whatever, a hip thruster or a booty builder or a glute builder or a Nautilus glute drive, or, you need an angled Smith machine that goes down all the way. Some of the Smith machines don't let you go down as far. Something like that to help people train. And then there's also some cool pieces coming out. There's like the gluteator is really cool. It's kind of like hip abduction with extension at the same time. Techno Gym now is making a hip abduction machine where you're in a squatted position. That looks cool. There's all sorts of cool stuff on the horizon. There's also all my equipment from BC Strength that's awesome, like the T-bell and the blocks and things like that. You can do, and especially having all the bands and glute loops and things like that. Gyms don't carry those because they get stolen. Well, they should have them at the front for you to check out. You leave your license or something and then you get it. Same with bar pads. Some gyms have like one bar pad and it's a year old and it's all weathered and cracks are in it. You guys need to invest in glute training. You need to invest in getting people optimal glute development. So if you have to buy 10 pads a year, that's only $300. Buy the 10 pads a year. Buy new bands. They want to buy something once and never again. And we need to change the culture.
I agree. Well, my last and very last question is going to be about whether you have changed your mind or your stance over something pertaining glute training over the years. Has ever changed in terms of your stance or your mind or your approach?
Even look at the hip thrust form, okay? You look at all the videos in the first 5 years of hip thrusting and they were all, you get to the top and you were like this, really arched. We never thought about spinal position. Then you had some people be like, ooh, my low back hurts. My back hurts when I do hip thrusts. So that led to the American hip thrust and the posterior pelvic tilt hip thrust. And then it led to the scoop method. So we would say, look forward, keep your gaze forward, move mostly from the sternum down and scoop. and you would do a posterior pelvic tilt, and that solved all the back pain. But then some people were saying, well, when I do the scoop method, I feel it more in my quads or my hands. So I'd go back to the hinge method, which was don't look forward. You look forward at the bottom, you look up at the top. So your head and neck follow your torso. So then we said, okay, it's okay to do the scoop or the hinge. But if you do single leg hip thrust, don't do the scoop, do the hinge method. And it's like we've had a evolution of the technique that we use. And now we're doing, we've always done a lot of lockout work, but I would say 2/3 of my hip thrust variations are lockout work, meaning we might do 1/3 of our sets are normal hip thrusts, but 2/3 are pause reps where you pause at the top, or band, or bar plus band, or pulses where you just do the top range, or 1 1/4 reps. We do so much lockout work because you're always going to be limited by how much you can lock out.
That's awesome. Bret, I am so grateful that I was able to see you and have a chat with all things glutes. Is there anything that is coming up for you? Any future projects?
I just want to get strong lifting more popular. My ladies are seeing such good results working on their strength at the big 6 lifts. My favorite 6 exercises are squats, bench press, deadlifts, military press, chin-ups, and hip thrusts. I've gotten them to really focus on their strength on those lifts, and they're seeing such good results in the physique department. And I'm hoping that, other even bikini competitors focus on strong lifting for your whole off season. You will be pleasantly surprised with how your physique looks when you come around and start prepping for your bikini competition.
That's awesome.
That's what I'm hoping to popularize and get more popular over time. But yeah, I really believe in strength training for women, and it's a really hard, it's something I've been working on trying to do my whole life, and I'll probably spend my whole life, because you're dealing with all the marketing, all the people out there saying yeah, you're going to get bulky, or don't do lifting, do this, do Pilates, do yoga, do bar method, do this sculpting method, because it's going to give you long, lean muscle. And it plays on you're preying on their like a naivete and their fears of getting too bulky. And so how lean you are has a lot to do with your diet. You know what I mean? And if you eat well and do strong lifting or whatever, you're going to be very shapely and lean, and you're going to look very athletic. It's hard to get that look by just dieting down alone, or doing tons of cardio, or doing activities that don't build muscle that well, like, yoga, Pilates, and things like that. They don't do as good. Bodybuilders are the most muscular. So you just kind of like learn from the bodybuilders, learn from the powerlifters, but then apply it to glute training and have that be the emphasis. And that's what I do.
That's awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming.
And I like that you've been persistent. I like the questions that you asked, Astrid. You're doing good. And you stayed on top of me. I'm so flaky, and you stayed in there. Sorry about that. I've just been, so all over the place. So this was a good interview, though. You were very creative. I liked it a lot. Sorry, the phone kept ringing. That was so annoying. I don't know how to disable it here, how to mute it here. Like you said, put on airplane mode. Well, how could I put on airplane mode and not affect yeah.
That's all right. Bret, thank you so much. I'm going to run to have breakfast and go to the hospital. See you.
Where do you live?
I'm in Australia.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Where, Sydney or what?
Gold Coast.
Gold Coast. Wow.
Bye-bye, Bret. Have a good day.
You too. Bye-bye.